I remember being a newish gun guy within the first couple of years. I got some catalog in the mail that had some shotgun flechette rounds, but it also had this round that I think they just called it the bitch. And it was like rocks and glass, little pieces of metal and ball bearings and stuff that you just load this in your shotgun, and it's like, hey man, we are gonna mess up whatever you shoot at. And I kept that. I want to say I still have that magazine somewhere, or that catalog somewhere, because I'm like, oh, these have to be dangerous. I should probably keep this in case I need to buy, in case I need to buy some.
Shotgun with Charlie.
Riding shotgun refers to the practice of sitting next to the driver in a moving vehicle. The term riding shotgun came around after the time of the stagecoach, when somebody used to sit next to the driver holding a shotgun, in case they ran into bandits. My name is Charlie Cook, and I drive a lot. I like to talk to people while I'm driving, so I interview people in my car while I'm driving. Welcome to Riding Shotgun with Charlie.
All right, before we start this episode of Riding Shotgun with Charlie, I want to thank you all for being here. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do. Please hit the notification bell. If you're listening to the show, if you're watching the show, if you enjoy the show, please make sure you share it with your friends. It is how we get the stagecoach across America. I'm glad you guys are all here. All right, today we are coming from Northvale. Today we are coming from Northvale, New Jersey, and I am with Robin Bartlett. Robin is an author and a firearm enthusiast and a Vietnam vet, and he's got a book out that is called Vietnam Combat. I forget the subtitle here. Firefights and Writing History. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about his Vietnam stuff. We're going to talk about Robin. Robin, thank you so much for being on the show.
Nice to be here, Charlie. I'm happy to ride shotgun.
I love it.
Without a shotgun.
Without a shot. Well, we are in New Jersey.
That's right. Have to be careful.
So we can't have a slingshot here, can we?
No.
Slingshots. I don't know if you know who Evan Knappen is. Evan's someone I had on the show. He's an attorney here in New Jersey. He practices up in New Hampshire as well. He recently did a podcast where he talked about the unserialized firearms. He talked about unserialized firearms, but he also said that in New Jersey, a BB gun is a firearm.
Right. That's right.
And they're unserialized, so your BB gun is an unserialized firearm in New Jersey. It's ridiculous.
I know, it's kind of crazy.
It's a lot crazy. I feel weird coming down to Jersey because I can't bring anything with me, if you know what I mean.
I do.
So, anyway.
Whenever I carry my guns to my gun club, I have to have them in a case sitting on the back seat with ammunition in the trunk. So I always keep them separate and make sure that I have my purchase certificates right there in the gun box. Never been stopped, but in the event I do, I'm following the law. It's difficult. I'm in Massachusetts. It's difficult to follow the law. I think somebody wrote a book called somebody had wrote a book or said something along the lines of every day we commit 3 felonies every day. So anyway, let's talk about you. Yes, sir.
So you are a young guy and you enlisted and ended up in Vietnam.
I did, but let me start with going way back to the great age of 8 years old. And my grandfather went to West Point, my father went to West Point, my brother went to West Point. We lived all over the country. Mm-hmm. And when it came time for me to go to college, I said, nope, I don't want to go to West Point. My father got an appointment to West Point, but I said, no, don't want to go into the military. I've been to 13 elementary and middle schools, 4 high schools. I said, enough is enough. But it was the height of the Vietnam War, and my college colleagues would get reclassified during the summer to 1A. And I said, well, I don't want that to happen. So I went into the RSWC program, which is how I got into the military. Yeah. But just to back up from that a little bit more, the way I got into guns was that at the age of 8, my father caught me out in the backyard with a box of 22 shells, a hammer, and a chisel. And my friend from down the block and I were banging the shells open and then putting the powder in a little pile. And then we had a book of matches, and we lit the powder and thought it was really cool.
Well, yeah, it is
and
really cool.
He said, I think it might be time for some lessons.
Right.
So we were living in Virginia at the time, and I joined the Davy Crockett Junior Rifle Club.
Wow.
The Davy Crockett Junior Rifle Club, and I got a 22 rifle, and I began on the NRA awards program.
Oh, cool.
To learn to shoot, target shoot at 50 feet. So that's how it all began for me.
That's awesome.
And literally, I have been in target shooting and have had a tremendous interest in target shooting to this day. I've transitioned. I shot all through college. I was on the ROTC rifle team. I've owned a fairly sophisticated 22 rifle. I did complete all of the NRA awards to include Distinguished Marksman.
Very cool.
But always in target shooting. That has been kind of the love of my life. And more recently, I transitioned to pistol shooting, and I've been very involved in bullseye pistol shooting. If you're
very cool.
If you're familiar with bullseye.
One hand in the pocket, right?
No. Bullseye is you shoot 3 different pistols.
Yeah.
You shoot slow fire, time fire, and rapid fire with each pistol. And it's a very demanding pistol shoot. The slow fire is 1 minute per shot, 10 shots, so you have 10 minutes to complete. Time fire is 4 seconds per round, and then rapid fire is 2 seconds per round.
Wow.
So you shoot that full course with 3 different pistols. And
different calibers.
22. You can use a 45 for the second round, or you can use a 38. But it's hard to shoot anything except a semi-automatic for rapid fire.
Right. That's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. I a couple years after I became a gun guy, I was the guy that tried to get my neighbors into it, my buddies into it, because I didn't grow up hunting or shooting, and the guys I hung out with didn't either. So I remember I was going through the Winchester qualification program that the NRA has, and we would do it, I don't know, once a month on a Friday with my buddy. It was really just a reason to get away from the wife and kids. so that was good. All right, so tell us about your Vietnam experience. This is what your whole book has been about. Tell us about this.
So after Vietnam, I was actually a career officer, and I spent 6 years in the service. And after Vietnam, I started to talk with a lot of veteran friends, people that I had known, some classmates who were also veterans. And in talking about our mutual experiences, I found that I had experienced some events that were unusual and that they had not. And I was in the 82nd Airborne Division in the U.S., and they wanted to keep airborne officers in airborne units in Vietnam. So I went over to Vietnam on orders to the 101st Airborne Division. But when I got there, it was right after the Tet Offensive of 1968, and there had been so many officer casualties that they said, all your orders are canceled. We'll let you know where you're going to go. So I spent 3 days in the replacement depot in 105-degree heat, waiting for orders. And I was ultimately assigned to the 1st Air Cav Division, which actually turned out to be a wonderful assignment in that the whole concept behind the air mobile concept was you bring fresh troops to the battle via helicopter as opposed to, humping the boonies. So, which meant you could carry lighter weight, more water, more ammunition. And by comparison, my pack was about 45 pounds. Some of my classmates and other vets would typically carry 70 pounds.
Wow.
So there was a substantial difference. But the other side of that coin was that you made helicopter combat assaults into landing zones, and even though they prepped the landing zone with artillery and Cobra helicopter gunships, it was not uncommon for not the first bird, but the second bird in to be shot down. And if that happened, the men on the ground had to fight it out on their own, because they wouldn't bring in additional choppers if they had lost one on the ground. So I made about 50 helicopter combat assaults, and there were 3 platoons in our company. When it was my platoon's turn to lead the combat assault, the helicopter combat assault, I would be in the first helicopter. And I would typically go heavy in that bird, meaning I would have 2 machine guns, M79 Grenadier, squad leader, radio operator, ammo bearer. I would carry the maximum firepower that I could on that helicopter.
Wow. That's pretty wild. How long were you in for?
Well, I was in the service for 6 years. I was a regular Army officer. I went to Vietnam as a second lieutenant. I was promoted to first lieutenant after 1 year. So literally on the day that I went in and met my battalion commander in the first cab, I was promoted to first lieutenant. And the life expectancy of a platoon leader in Vietnam was 90 days.
Wow.
And there were 4 officers that reported into that battalion commander on that particular day. We all were promoted to first lieutenant on the same day. And we were promoted after 1 year because there was a tremendous need for officers. There had been so many casualties.
Wow.
And we lined up in alphabetical order. So I went in first. And this battalion commander, it was about 8 o'clock at night. The battalion commander was absolutely exhausted. He gave us a 2-minute speech. And he said to the S1, the personnel officer who was standing there, "Where do we need these officers?" And he said, "Well, we need 1 to A, 2 to B, and 1 to C." Those are the company designations. And of course, so I was first in, so I was you to A, you 2 to B, and you to C.
Right.
I was the only officer to survive his tour.
Oh my gosh.
The other 3 officers were either killed or wounded.
My goodness.
So I attribute the fact that I survived to 3 very important things. Number 1, I tried very, very hard not to do anything stupid.
Right. That seems like it'd be the first one.
Yep. Well, it was not unusual to forget your training, to forget some of the basics.
Yeah.
Number 2, I sat down with my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders, and I said, "Listen, I'm coming in fresh. I'm green. I've had a lot of training, but I want to listen to you.
Right.
I'm still going to be in command, but if you see me making a mistake, we're going to go around this circle and go straight out.
Okay.
You tell me. I'm going to listen to you, and I want you to know that the welfare of this platoon, of the men in this platoon, is my first priority, not body count."
Right.
And body count was the metric by which we were evaluated in Vietnam. When you were in a skirmish, after it was all over, how many of them did you kill?
Right.
So that was not my priority. So I suspect I would never have been a great commander because I placed the welfare of my men at a higher priority. And
it's got to be tough when you've got to make the decision that we're going to do this, and some guys might not be coming back.
When you had a firefight, when the bullets started to fly overhead, everybody hit the ground. You hugged the ground. You put your face into the dirt. But you literally, as a platoon leader, as the leader of the platoon, you could literally feel all eyes turn to you.
Sure.
As the leader. And they wanted direction. They wanted you to tell them what to do. Right or wrong, they wanted you to make decisions. So, and sometimes those decisions did put men in harm's way.
Yeah.
But that was the one thing that I did do, is make a decision. Sometimes I was right. Sometimes it did put the soldiers in harm's way.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were only
22 years
22
old.
years old, right? Yeah, and how old were the guys that you were leading?
Well, they were, for the most part, draftees.
Mm-hmm.
They were 17 and 18 and 19 years old. I was the second oldest man in the platoon. We had one man, the old guy was 24 years old. And my platoon sergeant, who was supposed to be the most experienced man in the unit, was what they called an instant NCO. And he had gone through a 6-month course at Fort Benning, Georgia, in the infantry, and came out as a platoon sergeant, E6. And he had his 19th birthday in Vietnam. So he and I had about the same level of training and experience.
Right.
He was a good man. He ran the platoon extremely well, but he certainly didn't have 10 to 15 years worth of experience to direct.
This is I've got a friend that's a Vietnam vet, and he says the reason that the reason the government sends over young men to do battle is because they're 19, 20, 22 years old. They think they're invincible, and I'm like, I never thought of that.
We had to be very cautious about FNGs, and FNG is effing new guy. FNGs.
Yeah.
When you got a new man into your unit, you did not trust them. You had to, first of all, let them acclimatize to the average 105 to 115 degree heat.
That's insane.
And you had to let them get experienced in your procedure and your protocol and the way you ran your unit. And that sometimes took 3 weeks, sometimes over a month, and sometimes they were so squirrely that you couldn't trust them, and you found them a job in the rear.
Wow.
And I had one Sergeant E5 who joined my unit and had gone through one of these instant NCO programs, and he was gung-ho. He wanted to get his kill. He wanted to get his medals.
Yeah.
And he wanted to be a squad leader. And as an E5, he was legitimately, by rank, qualified to be a squad leader, whereas the other squad leaders I had were SP4s, Spec 4s.
All right, what does SP stand for?
Specialist.
Specialist.
Fourth class. He was a Sergeant E5. So
Okay.
he was one rank higher than they were.
What does E5 mean? E5, E6?
3 stripes.
Okay.
E5 is a sergeant, E5 is squad leader.
Gotcha.
E6 is 4 stripes and platoon sergeant.
Okay.
So, I first thing he did is salute me in the field, and I said, make that the last salute you ever deliver. And you don't say sir. We had no insignia on our uniforms. The only way you knew I was a lieutenant was on the
inside of your hat, right?
the band that went around my camouflage cover on my helmet said LT Bartlett. I was addressed as 1-6, 1 being the first platoon leader, 6 being the leader. So
Gotcha.
people called me 1-6 or they called me LT. They never said sir, they never saluted.
Right.
So that's the first thing he did, and I knew he was green because he saluted, said sir.
And they did this because
You're a target.
Right, because you didn't want the VC to know who the leader
Well,
was. So they didn't take
first
you
of
out.
all, the VC knew I was going to be the leader because the radio operator was walking within hand's reach right behind me, and in my thigh pocket was my map. So I stood out as if I was wearing a white uniform.
Gotcha.
Sometimes I had my radio operator walk in front of me, and the guy in front of him didn't like that. We're going to turn right here.
Okay.
So this sergeant, I said, I'm not going to make you a squad leader. You're going to have to acclimatize. He was carrying way too much equipment. We tried to get him to reduce the stuff he was carrying, but he was gung-ho. Mm-hmm. And after about a week or two, and he had some problems with his squad leader, but we figured he would calm down. We had a patrol go out, and he volunteered to go with that patrol. Yeah. And I said, okay, you can go with that patrol, but understand, the squad leader is still the squad leader. You are not in charge. Mm-hmm. He said, that's fine. I just want the experience. And unfortunately, there was an enemy sniper. They were attacked. And he stood up with a hand grenade and went running right at the sniper, throwing his hand grenade, and was shot right in the forehead.
Jeez.
So he became my first KIA, killed in action. Mm-hmm. And that's actually that story is the first chapter in my book.
Right.
And that chapter is called My First Worst Day in Vietnam, because when they brought him back, we didn't have body bags, so we had to wrap him in his poncho. I had to go through the pockets, make sure there wasn't anything in his pockets. I had to fill out a death card, which recorded the coordinates where he was killed as close as I could find them on the map.
Sure.
And I had attached the card to his boot along with one dog tag. The other dog tag remained around his neck. Wrapped the poncho around him. And when the chopper came in, these ponchos would flap all over the place. So I had a ball of twine, and I tied it off around the top of the head, around the waist, around the feet, so that the poncho wouldn't be a problem if in the rotor wash.
Right.
And that was a tough job. It was a very, very tough job for a 22-year-old.
I can't fathom that. Like, holy moly.
And I had to, unfortunately, do it quite a few times.
Right.
Because there were booby traps, and there were skirmishes, and there were ambushes. Sometimes we ambushed them, sometimes they ambushed us. Viet Cong and the NBA were excellent fighters. There was this tendency to think that they were all little, homegrown soldiers. They were not. They were excellent soldiers, and they were the masters of night fighting. They owned the night. They were far superior to us at night fighting than we were. So that's when they usually attacked. It was at nighttime. And it made it extremely difficult. We would create a fire base, not a fire base, but we would create a night defensive position. They called it an NDP. Mm-hmm. And we dig foxholes in a circle. And they had the capability of penetrating our defenses. And, it became a really very, very dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. Whenever we met them during the day, we had superior firepower, we had artillery, we had helicopter gunships, we could blow them away. We had jets come in with napalm. We're going to go straight this lane. So that was kind of the daily routine. We would be out for 4 to 6 weeks in the boonies. Mm-hmm. And I was up along the demilitarized zone in I Corps, right in the northern part of South Vietnam. Yeah. Laotian border on the west, Gulf of Tonkin on the east, and we would be all throughout that area. As you got in toward the Laotian border, it was 3 canopy jungle, meaning there were 3 layers of, we're going to go to the right up here, 3 layers of cover over your head.
Gotcha. That's wild. And how long were you in? I know you said you were in for 6 years, but how long were you?
The tour for an officer was 1 year, and you typically served, go left, you typically served 6 months to 7 months in the field, and then you rotated to a staff job. Mm-hmm. And my secondary specialty was as the S1, the personnel officer of the battalion. So when I first came into the unit, the existing S1, I told the S1 that that was my secondary specialty.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, that's great because you're going to be coming out of the field right about the time I'm leaving, and we'll make you the new S1 if you survive.
That's not encouraging.
No.
Yeah, keep going.
So I completed my tour and took my R&R, went to Tokyo, Japan, came back, and was understudying the S1, the personnel officer.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 3 days, he came to me one morning and he said, did you interview at division headquarters? I said, no. He said, well, I just got an order for you to go to division headquarters and interview for a job with the 14th MHD. And I said, what is the 14th MHD?
Yeah.
He said, I don't know. Go get on a helicopter. So I got on a helicopter. I went to the division forward at Camp Evans in I Corps near Quantry. And I started asking around, do you know where the 14th MHD, do you know what the 14th MHD is?
Right.
I finally found a soldier who said, I think it's down that road about a mile.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked down the road and I come to this tent, and out in front of the tent is a sign that says 14th Military History Detachment. Motto, you fight it, we write it.
Oh my gosh.
And my background in college, my degree is in comparative literature. And I've always been a reader and a writer.
Mm.
It's always come very naturally and easily to me.
Yeah.
So I was interviewed by a captain who had gone through the personnel files of every junior officer in the division, looking for people who had journalism or literature backgrounds. And there were 3. And he had offered the job to the other 2 and they turned it down. And I looked around this tent and I saw cots. I saw a refrigerator with cold Coke and beer in it.
Yeah.
I saw 2 fans and I saw a shower. And I said,
that's gotta be a good place to be.
he offered me the job and I said, I'll take it.
Oh my gosh.
So for the last 5 months, we would do a quarterly after action report. Each battalion had to submit a report on their contacts and on their activity during the quarter,
Mm-hmm.
plus lessons learned. And that we would take these documents, edit them, rewrite them sometimes.
Yeah.
There was a format it had to be in, and we had no copying machines.
Of course.
So you can actually turn left here.
All right, because yeah, we're that's a good time to roll.
We would have to type, with the maximum number of carbon copies you could make was 6 on an electric typewriter. So we had to type these things 3 times over to produce the number of copies to be sent and distributed throughout the Army.
Mm-hmm.
But that became the official battle report of the division. So that was our primary responsibility. Secondarily, Secondarily, the Division G3, that's the operations officer, he was a full colonel.
Yeah.
We would attend the division briefing every night with the division commander.
Mm-hmm.
And if the division had been in a very significant contact, 2 or 3 day contact, often we would be sent out after the contact to interview the remaining soldiers and officers who were not either killed or wounded,
Mm-hmm.
and piece the battle back together again. And as I mentioned before, a lot of these battles occurred at night.
Mm.
So it was extremely difficult to know
exactly what was going on.
what happened.
Yeah.
So I would go out with the sergeant, who was a photographer and also an artist, and try to interview the officers who remained. Sometimes we even went to the battalion aid station and interviewed soldiers who had minor wounds.
Stay straight and
No, we're going to go straight.
Okay.
It was difficult because usually especially on one occasion, our company was literally wiped out. 120 men, 80 were either killed or wounded. And it was the company was decimated, and it had to be pulled back to the rear to be re-equipped. And as I mentioned before, the metric by which we were evaluated was body count.
Mhm.
And when this was an engagement with an NVA regiment, and the NVA, it was the 3-day battle at night, and when the NVA left, they took all their dead and wounded with them. So there was no body count. And the battalion commander and the S3, that's the operations officer, refused to be interviewed by me.
Really?
I was first lieutenant at the time. They refused to be interviewed. They said if the division G3 operations officer wishes to find out what happened, they can call me and talk to me directly. But I did talk to the company commander, who survived.
Yeah.
None of his platoon leaders survived. None of his platoon sergeants survived. As I said, out of 120 men, 80 were killed and wounded. So it was a disaster for our side.
Yeah.
So I came back, took all my notes, wrote them up, and turned in my report. And the Division G3 threw it back at me and said, if a company commander allows his unit to be decimated, he must bear responsibility for the failure.
Wow.
And he said, there's no enemy body count shown in this report. I said, that's because the enemy took their dead and wounded with them.
Yeah.
He said, put down 450 NVA killed. And I said, where did he get that number?
Right.
But I was ordered to do that. So that's what the final report said.
Wow. So
reputations hinged on these types of reports.
Oh,
His reputation,
yeah.
the battalion commander's reputation, and their careers.
Unbelievable.
So, like I said, body count was the metric by which commanders were evaluated.
Jeez. That's wild. That is wild, because how much the pessimist in me starts to say, okay, well, how much other information do we have that's
Accurate?
not accurate? Right.
Good question. Good question.
Wow. That's pretty wild. That is wild. So that was good that you got a job that got you out of
Toward the
out of
end,
the field.
I got into my 11th month, and an officer fills out a form called a dream sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And you put down where you would like to be assigned. And I said, well, I'd like to be assigned to the West Coast. That meant Fort Ord, California, or Fort Lewis, Washington. Those were the big two military bases on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get orders, so I talked to my boss, and I convinced him to allow me to go to Saigon for a 3-day R&R and to find out what my orders were. So after enjoying myself for 2.5 days with another sergeant, who was my driver, I started asking around, went to MACV headquarters, Military Assistance Command Vietnam, in Saigon, and was ushered into this gymnasium, an actual gymnasium with the hoops pulled up. And on the floor of this gymnasium were these low trays, wooden trays. And the computer at that time was Fortran publishing punch cards.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 58,000 cards on these trays, each card representing a soldier in Vietnam.
Wow.
So we go down the line, alphabetically, of course.
Yeah.
A to B, to BA, to BAR, to Bartlett John, to Bartlett Peter, to Bartlett Paul, and then Bartlett Robin. Pull the card out and says, oh, you're going to Seattle, Washington, Fort Wainwright. And I went, wait a minute. I went to high school in Seattle, Washington. There is no Fort Wainwright in Seattle, Washington. It says APO Seattle. We had to get a directory to find out that Fort Wainwright was in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Oh my gosh.
So I got the West Coast, right? That's where I went. I went from 105 to 115 degree heat during the summer, fortunately, to about 65 was how warm it would get.
Oh my gosh. That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. So what did you do in Alaska?
Well, I was a company commander. I was promoted to captain by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was put in charge of a headquarters company. Had $25 million worth of equipment, 240 men in my company.
Yeah.
We had track vehicles, we had 2.5-ton trucks, we had ambulance vehicles, and we spent all our time in the motor pool trying to get our vehicles to work. And they were all World War II vehicles.
Oh
so we would go on maneuvers, and within 5 miles, everything would break down. 50% of our vehicles would break down.
Oh my goodness.
So finally, they said this. Of course, Vietnam had the priority on parts and repair parts.
Yeah.
Finally, they said this isn't working. We put all our vehicles on a railroad train. We're going to take a right, not here, but the next one.
Good, because you got me
And
lost.
we shipped all the.
This one?
Yep. Well, we can turn right here down. We shipped all of our. I'm going to go left. Shipped all of our vehicles and equipment, and we became a light infantry unit. There was only a brigade there. That's 2 battalions, about 10,000 men.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I took it the wrong way. Go left and then back right.
It's all right.
And we became a light infantry unit,
Mm-hmm.
put on skis and snowshoes, and learned how to ski.
Oh my gosh, what are we doing?
I'm going to go right.
Okay.
So after 2 years there, I was I received orders to go to the career course at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah.
And on the way, I stopped at the. Okay, I'm going to go right here. At the Office of Personnel Operations. That way.
All right.
I stopped in and I met with a major who was my quote advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an armor officer. And I said, this is strange. Having an armor officer counsel an infantry officer?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, Captain Bartlett, you have done a marvelous job. You're in the top 5% of your class. We have a wonderful career planned for you. We're going to send you to the career course. Take a ride up here, I think.
Okay.
We're going to send you to the career course. And then to the Monterey Language Institute, teach you how to speak Vietnamese, and send you back to Vietnam for your second tour as a Vietnamese unit advisor.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, wait a second. That's not exactly what I have in mind. And I'm lost too.
Yeah, this doesn't look like we're going anywhere good.
No, we want to do a U-turn to go back. And I told him what I wanted to do, which was to go to Germany.
Yeah.
And be a military attaché. And he said, well, we can talk about that when you come back from your second tour in Vietnam. This is what we have you programmed for. I'll take a left here. Kind of go back the way we came. And I said, no, that's not, I don't want to be programmed. That's not what I want to do.
That's not what I was planning on, yeah.
And he said, well, I said, the career course is voluntary, so I unvolunteer.
There you go.
Okay, we're going to go straight up.
All right.
He said, yeah, well, you've been back in the United States for more than 12 months. Therefore, you're eligible for reassignment to Vietnam. We're going to send you back to Vietnam right now. Take the weekend and think it over.
Oh my gosh.
So I took the weekend. It was a pretty horrendous weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Called my father, told him I don't wish to be programmed. This is not what I want, what I signed up for, not what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I came back on Monday morning and I said to this major, okay, go ahead and reassign me to Vietnam, but I want my resignation on file for 365 days from today's date.
Yeah.
I figured, well, I have 1 month of vacation. I only will have to serve 6 months in the field.
Yeah.
I'm doing all the date
math.
stuff, right? And so this major goes and huddles with 2 other majors, comes back and say, well, let's not be hasty.
Oh, jeez. Jeez.
Here the Army has spent all this money to move you and your family from Alaska to Georgia. And then I knew he had never even looked at my file because I was a bachelor and everything I owned fit in my car. But for the first time in my life, I was smart and I kept my mouth shut. And he said, well, we'll send you on down to Fort Benning, Georgia. You can be an instructor or something. They'll find a job for you.
They'll find a job,
and
right.
if you change your mind, we'll reprogram you for the career course. And I ended up with the leadership department of the infantry school, which actually turned out to be a wonderful job. And I was put on a special group that developed a course of instruction called Leadership for Professionals that was implemented Army-wide. They brought in an officer and a senior NCO from every Army unit throughout the world, and we trained the trainers. And we put together a book of readings, class notes, class structure, a package, plus overhead transparencies. This was before PowerPoint, before computers. And we assembled all these packages of instructional material, which actually launched me into my civilian career, which was in publishing.
Now let's talk about that. So you get into publishing. What are you doing in the publishing biz?
Well, I went to work for the leading textbook publisher, Prentice Hall, and was a textbook sales representative. They had me. They gave me a territory in Southern California. I lived in a wonderful little apartment 3 blocks from the beach in Santa Monica. And I had the downtown colleges in LA. And I went up to UCLA, USC. I had USC, UCLA, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo, over to Bakersfield, and to Claremont, my college. So that was kind of my territory. And they had me work on what we call the hard side, meaning I sold science, math, engineering books, which was not my background.
Right.
And that was intentional. They didn't want you to talk to professors that you knew something about the subject matter. They wanted you to go in representing, you had literature about each one of your books.
Right.
And they taught you how to find the right book for the course. And that's what it was all about, to present the professor with choices that you had available for his course. And then you send him a free copy. And I did very, very well on that, plus manuscript acquisition.
Yeah.
That was part of my responsibility. And after 2 years, I got promoted back to Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, which was the headquarters.
Yeah.
And met an editorial assistant there, and started a nice romance. And 2 years later, proposed, got married, had 3 kids, bought a house, had 3 kids, 3 boys, none of whom had followed in the military tradition, by the way.
Right.
My favorite story about my oldest, who went on to get a PhD, was when he went to the University of Scranton, and my wife had actually broken her ankle, so she couldn't go to parent-student orientation. This is the first day of, this is when you took your kid to school and dropped him off, but they had an orientation program. And so toward the end of the program, they were introduced to all the clubs. They went into this big room, I'm going to go straight, went into this big room, and all the clubs were on the outside perimeter of the room, and in the center was ROTC. And I saw an officer standing there with the first cab patch on. I said, "Oh, Jason, my son, let's go talk to the ROTC. Let's just find out about it. Let's see what's going on here." And I'm thinking, I know that this would be a way to afford part of his education,
right?
Because they really had upped the pay to soldiers to young men who signed up to be in ROTC.
Yeah.
So I'm having this conversation with the major, and we had been in Vietnam, not at the same time, but we've both been with the first cab. So we're having this chat, and my son is standing behind me, and he has a little conversation with one of the ROTC cadets, and I'm getting the major to tell me about all the benefits of being in ROTC. And after he does, I turn to my son to say, "Jason, isn't this wonderful? He's gone.
Oh no.
He's gone. He's off to one of the clubs down at the far end. My wife, his mother, had schooled him. He said, if he takes you to ROTC, you go someplace else.
Oh my goodness. That's great.
Yeah.
So how does all of this, how does this parlay into writing a book? Because you were telling me it took, I will say this, what I like about the book is you've got all of your Vietnam stories, but you also have all of the letters that you wrote and sent home.
It took me the better part of 10 years to write the book. And as I mentioned before, I had these conversations with other vets.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that I had some things happen to me that were unusual, that had not happened to them. For example, I was in a helicopter that crashed. And not too many people survived crashes.
Sure.
And that's another story. But I decided each one of these stories, each one of these events became a chapter in my book. And the only time I had to write was I had a job that took me on long airplane flights coast to coast.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd get out my laptop and I'd write a chapter. And it was just an amazing thing that would happen to me because I would become so engrossed in the chapter that I was writing and reliving the story that I could experience the event in amazing detail. And it was often that I could I actually saw the scene again. I saw the colors. I smelled the smell. I could even smell the smells.
Right.
I would come away often with sweat on my face and my underarms, having experienced this event.
Wow.
My favorite author is Stephen King. And he talks in a wonderful book called On Writing, about, quote, falling into your computer. Well, he worked on a typewriter at the time.
Right.
Falling into the typewriter, which means you become so engrossed in what you're writing that you literally black out everything around you. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
And many people who've read my book have said, I'm just amazed at the detail that you could recollect. And that was how it came about. My mind just retained. It's amazing how much detail your mind can retain if you concentrate on it. And that's what happened to me.
That's pretty wild. Because it was, I mean, when you wrote the book, it was obviously a number of years afterwards.
It was about 40 years afterwards. And I sent it out to a number of friends when I had finished, and they said, this is great, go ahead, get it published. But two of my friends were from the book world. One was a classmate, and one was a book shepherd who works in publishing to help authors develop their manuscripts.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, you only want to sell this to military people, right? And I said, no, I want general readers to be able to access it too.
Yeah.
They said, well, you need to put more of your personal feelings and emotions into the book. And that was extremely difficult to do.
Yeah.
Recalling some of these events.
Sure.
And I remembered these letters that I had written home, and my mother saved all the letters, over 100 letters that I wrote home. She left them in the envelope, so they were all date stamped.
That's pretty wild.
And I put them in chronological order, and I reread every letter, and I grabbed snippets and put it into the book. So you could read the story as I related it, and then you could read what I wrote home about. Wasn't always quite the same.
That's interesting though, because when you're reading these letters that you wrote back in the late 60s when you were in Vietnam, like that's also got to bring you right back.
Yeah, writing the book was supposed to be a catharsis for me. It was supposed to get me through all this crap that I endured, and I likened it to keeping all those events and emotions in this titanium steel trunk buried in the back of my mind. And it didn't work. It brought it all back out. And I had to relive so many of these events. Many of them were horrific. Some of them are humorous.
Right.
It's a mix. It's not all combat. It's not all killing.
Right. Yeah.
There's some funny stuff that happened to me.
Let's hear a funny story.
Well, I have two that are kind of funny. One is FNGs, FN new guys in the field and on base camp.
Yeah.
we had a new guy join us at the base camp.
Yeah.
And we would be out in the field for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we'd come in for a week. We could get clean clothes. We would get showers. We would have some hot food. Didn't have to eat sea rations all the time. And we explained to this FNG what the procedure was for getting rid of the shit in the latrine. And the way the Army did it was they built a latrine.
Yeah.
And they took a 55-gallon drum and they cut it in half. We're going to go straight.
Okay.
They cut it in half, and they would have a 2-holer, and they put these half a 55-gallon drum underneath the holes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Build it up. And so once a day, an FNG would pull out the can, put in a fresh can, and we told him very detailed instructions.
Mm-hmm.
You go and you get a 105 millimeter howitzer shell, empty shell,
Yeah.
made out of brass. You fill it with diesel fuel, and you pour half into one can and half into the other can. You take a book of matches, you light it, and throw it into the can, and then you stir. So yeah, he said, "You got it? We got it." So he went, pulled the cans out, went up to got a 105 millimeter howitzer shell, empty shell.
Yeah.
And filled the bladders with fuel. They had the diesel fuel in one bladder,
Mm-hmm.
and they had the airplane fuel in another bladder. And he didn't read the signs.
Oh no.
So he filled the canister with JP4 fuel, gasoline. Wouldn't go to the right and go straight across.
Gotcha.
So he poured half of the gasoline into one can and half of the gasoline into the other can, and he hadn't pulled the canisters out very far. So when he threw the match into the canister, it exploded. And shit blew all over the place.
Literally hit the
It
fan.
also set the latrine on fire
Oh my gosh.
and burned it to the ground.
That's
And the
great.
2 guys who were in there went running out,
Right.
and that poor soldier had to help the engineers rebuild the latrine, and he was on that duty for the next week.
No shit.
Yeah, no shit.
That's crazy. That is crazy. All right, listen, before we run out of battery, how can people contact you and get your book? I know your website's got some great videos and stories on it.
Yep.
You got a lot of stuff going on, which is wonderful. How can people find?
The best way is if they would like to read more information, look at videos, look at pictures, is to visit my website, which is www.robinbartlettauthor.com. And then if you click on order, you can order a copy of the book, autographed, of course, with free shipping, and save $13 off the cover price.
Nice.
www.robinbartlettauthor.com, or they can just Google Robin Bartlett. Being cautious to know that there is a female actor by the name of Robin Bartlett.
That's not you.
Not me.
That's awesome. That's great. All right, we're gonna pull over. We're gonna pull over and we're gonna wrap things up. Because,
okay.
Like I said, I don't know how much battery we have left here, so we're just gonna pull over right here.
You got me yakking a lot.
This is great, though. This is great. So, RobinBartlettAuthor.com?
RobinBartlettAuthor.com.
All right, we're going to put a link in there. You have a YouTube channel with some videos, too, right?
Yes, if you can actually play the videos right off my website.
Gotcha, very cool. Robin, thank you so much for being on.
My pleasure.
Thank you for sharing all these stories. This has been great. I don't have any military experience, so I'm always I get absorbed in it. You know, when one of the things I like about your book is when you put the acronyms in, you explain what the acronyms are. But I'm one of these guys, when I hear about the acronyms and read them, I've got to go back and say, all right, what was that?
What was that one again?
Right.
Sure.
Right. And FMG, I think I can remember, though. But the rest of them,
easy.
Right. Anyway, so thank you very much for being on the show.
I just want to mention one last thing, and that is it's very common today to say to veterans, thank you for your service. Absolutely nothing wrong with saying that. However, if you see a Vietnam veteran, and we're all in our late 60s, early 70s, if you say welcome home to a Vietnam veteran, it's a game changer. You will see an amazing response to that statement as opposed to thank you for your service. Try it and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Interesting. I since I read that, I've thought about that. I'm like, all right, so this is a younger person. Do I say welcome home? Do I say thank you for your service? I always just say God bless you. So that's not like they sneeze, but but whenever I hear someone, God bless them for their service and what they've done to our country and to keep it free, to keep America free.
Yep.
All right, awesome. We're going to put a link to all that stuff. Thank you guys for watching this episode of Riding Shotgun with Charlie. If you are not a member of the Second Amendment Foundation, you can join at saf.org. It's only $150 for a lifetime membership. If you enjoy this show, obviously you need to share it with some other people, but you can find other great podcasts at sdrn.us for the Self-Defense Radio Network. It is all your favorite pro-freedom podcasts in one place. And thank you very much. Again, I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.